Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's Friday lecture event. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. Friday lecture series is organized by the Consciousness Studies program at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. It is conceptualized by Dr. Sankita Menon, who is the head and dean of Consciousness Studies program and the Humanities School. So once again, I welcome all of you to our event today, and it is fantastic to have Gopesh also here. We know each other, so it's fun to see you at Friday lecture, Gopesh, because we have already interacted through Kavya Lab and all of that. So without further ado, let me also request Preet Kona, who is a doctoral fellow at NIAS and a very dear friend as well, to please introduce Gopesh and the title for today, the topic for today. Over to you, Preet.
Namaskarams, very good evening to one and all. It gives me a lot of happiness to introduce today's speaker, Gopesh Jha, also because we studied together, bachelor's and master's at the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda. So Gopesh Jha is an archaeologist by training and has completed his post-graduation in archaeology from MSU Baroda. His research interests are human origins and dispersals, stone tool research, site formation studies, and paleoecological studies. Gopesh also is conceptualized a very interesting talk and series called the Paleo Talks, which spanned for about 6 months during the pandemic, with over 29 sessions and 54 speakers from across the globe. And with a wonderful team, it was quite an interesting session, which dealt on a lot of topics on archaeology, on paleoecology, and likewise. He's currently currently pursuing his second master's at the University of Évora, Portugal, in archaeological material sciences, and he's a recipient of the Erasmus Mundus scholarship. Very happy to have you with us here, Gopesh. And without further ado, I would request you to start with today's session. Over to you, Gopesh.
Thank you so much. I would like to convey my gratitude towards NIAS CSP and again, all the dear and honorable members of this particular institution for giving me this opportunity. Without doing more delay, we directly jump to the presentation. So as I was speaking earlier and talking, and it's not going to be a monologue, it's more going to be a dialogue. We'll try to discuss certain of the things as I put very basically talking about recent advancements in human origin research. As the subject says, somewhere between archaic and modern. And that's where the dilemma is, the puzzle is. It's all about that, what exactly is happening between the archaic and the modern. When exactly that archaic attributes, rather behavioral, anatomical, and other things are lost, and when exactly we become modern. And that concept, actually, the problem is not evidence. The problem lies in the concept and the comprehension. So that's kind of been challenged by recent advancements in human origins in the last 2 decades. And we talk about those things. But why exactly we need to talk about human origins? By studying that, it teaches you why you need to be sensitive, not towards the other human beings, but also towards the other beings living in the nature or towards the environment. As we know, today we live in an Anthropocene, where human being is a planet-shaping force, as a planetary force, responsible for so many actions. For understanding its dynamics with the environment and the ecology and the past flora and the fauna, it is quite necessary in order to shape a better future or sustainable one in upcoming times. What exactly we have on the platter today? We're going to talk about in 2 parts, that evolution of evolutionary thinking from linear to structured models. We talk about how we perceive as a layman and also as a researcher, we see human evolution, how the progression what is visual of that progression comes in our brain the moment we think about human evolution. And exactly one of the main subject, the Homo sapiens, how this particular research is very, very affected and influenced by the particular subject of evolutionary discourse. So you have 4 kinds of evidences. You have different nature of evidences, and we talk in detail about these evidences in upcoming slides. We have genetic recent ancient DNA records, you have culture materials from stone tools to different art materials, rock art, so and so. Then you have anatomical fossil materials and ecological materials, which is quite recent, where you talk about environmental context. So what kind of habitants are living in what kind of environment and what kind of ecological resources they are exploiting and using. But in order to do that, we always have to be quite skeptic. It's very kind of a tricky job to do it. And that's where we have lots of examples where people have manipulated and kind of put things into kind of a jacketed manner. Not only manipulating the evidence, but creating the evidence in order to support some hypotheses or some models. And one of the big example is the quest for the missing link. So there was an idea that we all developed somewhere from the ape, we have similarities, we become humans, ape is ape, and somewhere in between you have this particular fossil which has to have certain features of ape and certain features of Homo sapiens or anatomically modern humans or hominins. And that kind of led to the discovery of this Piltdown man in Sussex, England, the town itself called Piltdown, where you see kind of a crania of something of sort of anatomical modern humans and jawbones showing teeth like canine specifically of an ape-like. But what exactly happened afterwards? It was a fake. It was a complete hoax. The mandible or the jawbone belongs to orangutan, where the molar teeth has been piled, like how you file the nails, filed, and one can see the scratches of this later development. And certain things are kind of altered as well. So you understand how people did this kind of work in order to prove their hypothesis. And I have to start to say, this thing was published in Nature, which is again, for us, anything published in Nature and Science, we kind of accept because it has a high impact factor. We kind of rely on the outcomes. But certain times we have to be critical in terms of acceptance of these research ideas. But I don't think this idea is completely gone of missing link. Even today, whenever we think or visualize the human evolution, the one picture pops up in our brain that, okay, there is an ape-like member which walks on a straightforward path and becoming a bearded gentleman at the end of the process. But that's not how the evolution works. There's no single linear progression. What happened next? We have human phylogeny. The idea was almost proposed by Darwin. I don't know who is the original proponent of the idea, but we know it in a better manner. It has been there in a biological evolution. So what exactly is this? You have this evolutionary tree talking about human phylogeny, where different members or different taxa related, compared, and differentiated on the basis of their anatomical similarities and difference. So basically, all the taxa who have same anatomical features, they are close contact, they have a close relationship, and who had different features, they share different relationship or distant in terms of evolutionary relationship. But still, there are lots of crucial components are missing and unacknowledged. What are these components? We'll talk in upcoming slides. There are lots of we see, but it does not tell lots of things. Like the many lineages, the late lineages of Homo erectus, Chinese archaic populations, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Naledi, Floresiensis. We talk about these species in upcoming slides as well. And Luzonensis, there are many multiple species we are coexisting with anatomically modern humans. And these are the only known ones. There are multiple other things we don't know. And at many temporal junctions, these species, they kind of interbred and there was admixture events. But also apart from that, there's enigmatic ghost populations, which is there. You get to see them in ancient DNA or ancient genomic records, but you don't have any phenotype or you don't have fossil for it. Or is it also possible we already have a fossil, but we don't have a DNA record of those fossils? So we don't know what we have in our platter and what exactly the genomic data shows, whether they are same or not. But what exactly the genetic data tells us, there are multiple super archaic populations in different part of the old world itself. And these archaic populations, and as well as Denisovans and Neanderthals, they have been contributing, they have been admixturing, they have been mating and interbreeding with modern human populations at different temporal junctures. And you just think of populations are moving and different populations are interacting with different populations. in different area at different time period, what exactly is the result of that admixture, what is the result of that interaction. And that is something which is quite complicated, and that is not addressed by human phylogeny or that evolutionary tree like model. So it is quite clear that there is a Neanderthal ancestry throughout the world. We all have Neanderthal DNA, but it was earlier assumed that we don't see Neanderthal ancestry in African populations, but that kind of disregarded recently by colleagues like Joshua K, Sriram, Shankar Raman, and many colleagues who are working in America. Talking about, so what, there are two ways to kind of extracting DNA record. Either you can extract genomic record from the ancient fossils, which are hominin fossils, or you can look for the remnants of this DNA or gene into modern population. And that's what these guys did. These people did. Like they kind of look into the genomic profile of multiple populations throughout the Africa, and they found that certain African populations do have this Neanderthal ancestry. Why exactly it exists, we don't know. There's a possibility, one kind of say, that there was a population which was going out of the Africa, and it is possible they must have interbred with Neanderthals in Eurasia or somewhere in the Eastern or Eastern Europe, and they came back. There was a back to Africa, or kind of a backlash, or return back into the Africa, this kind of dispersal. Also, one need to think about that in very clear manner. It's quite simple in a way. Whenever we talk about diaspora, one thinks, okay, people are emerging in Africa, going out, reaching Asia, then going back to Australia. It's not like that, today I start in Addis Ababa and tomorrow I have to reach Delhi. It's like people are moving for sake of finding more habitats, for sake of finding more suitable niches to thrive, to survive, or support the subsistence. And that's what is happening. Same like Neanderthals, we also have Denisovan DNA. And Denisovan DNA, you also have variety in a way. You have the DNA which comes from the Altai, Siberia. Then you have another set of DNA which come in Papua New Guinea, which is very high in number. And that's what makes us think, how come we don't have fossil anywhere there, and the Papua New Guineans have this high amount of Denisovan DNA, which is possible that the populations over there might have interbred with the populations which are closely related with Denisovans or Denisovans at certain point of time. But we'll talk about that in detail in upcoming slides. But two different examples of this introgression or the interbreeding. This example is from Romania. This Romanian early modern human individual has a 6 to 9% of genome which is coming from Neanderthals. What shows exactly? It shows that there was a Neanderthal member in the family or ancestry just 5-6 generations ago. There's another example of hybridization coming from a discovery from the Denisova cave, which is where the Denisovans are discovered for first time in Altai, Siberia, that there is a individual called Deni, a girl, somewhere living around 90 kilo years or 90,000 years old, and had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. Now, what exactly it suggests? There was a very, very multiple events of this interbreeding or kind of a admixture. But again, what exactly is the frequency of it? Because they still have this distinct DNA profiles, genotypes. And if they kind of mated for so infrequent basis, what we exactly tend to see is kind of overprinting by the one. So if you have a very frequent admixture or interbreeding, either Neanderthal DNA replaces Denisovan DNA or Denisovan DNA replaces Neanderthal DNA. That's how this thing works. But in the record, we don't see that. We still have these distinct genetic features, what we can kind of differentiate between both of them. So you see these kind of multiple episodes of this hybridization. But also in certain way, many of these integration kind of contributed to the expansion or probably to survival of modern humans. Like some of the genes which came from Denisovans and some of the genes which came from Neanderthals are quite important to us. Like for example, EPAS1, which is kind of found in Tibetan populations, which help them to survive in a low oxygen environment, which come from a Denisovan. Makes sense, like Denisovans are also living in the Siberian kind of landscape, which is some of that sort itself. Then you have a certain DNA like STAT2, which kind of affect the immune system and found in about 5% of Eurasians and 54% of Papuans, which is kind of coming from Neanderthal lineage. So it tells you like how these things are also helping you in terms of understanding not only modern humans or anatomically modern humans are meeting or administering with these people or these species, but they're also assimilating. There's also kind of a natural selection going on in terms of gene pool, what we see in current population itself. The biggest subject at this point of time, which needs a lot of attention, which had a lot of attention, is the topic of emergence of anatomically modern humans, and which is very well affected by the subject what we just talked about, this whole recent advancement in genomic data or the culture advancement of the fossil records. So what exactly you see over there? You have multiple crania or multiple fossil specimens throughout Africa occurring somewhere in Middle Pleistocene. Middle Pleistocene is a period between somewhere 750 to 130 kilo years. But most of them are kind of belonging 200, 150 to 350 or 400 kilo years. So you have a diverse amount of features. I cannot put all of these specimens in anatomically modern humans because they do not have all those features. And I cannot also call them completely archaic because they do have some features which kind of belong to the anatomically modern humans or Homo sapiens, like the globular brain case is something which is very anatomically AMH-like feature, or the presence of this very dominant brow ridge, which is a very archaic feature. So you have this multiple different populations growing in a different part of Africa, showing fragment of features which is related or traits which is related to anatomically modern humans, and which one is contributing to the emergence of anatomically modern humans? That will be question. But is it necessary that we have to only give a credit to only single population? Is it possible that we have to think beyond this single center origin? And that's what kind of reflected in culture material as well. There are multiple things within this culture material which one has to consider. We won't go in that today. But what exactly I want you to think, you see this multiple kind of stone tools as well as some of the culture materials like shell beads and kind of engraved this ochre nodule from Bolombos Cave around 75 kilo years. So you have multiple amount of what you shows kind of a cultural or behavioral diversity. So what exactly people mean to say, there are multiple set of population living in different part of the Africa, and they are producing different kind of culture materials. But throughout the time and space, these meta population or these subgroup or subpopulations are meeting at different temporal junctions, meeting, going away, meeting, going away, meeting, going away. And there is a multiple episode of hybridization among these different archaic or modern human like lineages. And at some point of time, the features, what you see, the phenotypic attributes, what you see, which is related to anatomically modern humans, become so prominent, what you see as a modern human emergence. But it is not happening. It's not an event centric. It's a process which is where multiple authors are playing an important role. And these authors are these multiple populations. So there's no, there's no Eden, there's no Eve as such a concept, which kind of responsible for the emergence of whole anatomically modern humans. And that's what you not only see in the Africa, but also you see in outside of Africa. You have multiple species which are kind of has a very prominent species like anatomically modern humans, but have multiple other species which are archaic in nature. They do have certain anatomically modern human features. So like I give an example like Epidema 1. This is one of the earliest fossil of modern humans, which is 210 kilo years from Greece. So which fossil is a kind of a very fragmentary, it's only a skull cap. But then you also have a fossil from Kavze, multiple modern human fossil from Kavze belonging to 90 kilo years. And one of the fossil like Kavze 5, there's a backside of the skull. When you touch your backside, you kind of see this kind of a slope. So this feature kind of matches the Epidema 1. Now, how can you explain that how Epidema 1 has a feature which also belongs to Kavze, which is related to AMH? So that is something we have to know, whether epidema kind of persisted for a long time or whether it died out. That is something unclear. And what kind of cultural preprints these archaic population left, this is also quite unclear. But also one thing is quite very important in this scenario. There's multiple Chinese archaic, or there's lots of archaic populations within Asia, and they are not only different in terms of anatomy, but they are producing different set of convergently locally improvised or emerge these cultural prints like stone tool technologies, which has to be understood in a very, very open manner in order to understand, because there is a break in transmission, but we don't know when exactly it's happening. Now you come to see how much complications we talked about, and we'll talk about a couple of more examples which kind of started the discourse 15 years ago with a discovery of certain fossils. But before that, we'll have one more important member of like Homo antecessor from Grandolina, Atapuerca in Spain. It dates back to 800 to 850, some 70 kilo years, belonging to the end of early Pleistocene, somewhere near the start of middle Pleistocene. So this is a very typical fossil which people have been defined as this European form of Homo erectus. But what exactly is quite interesting, that what Lacruz has been doing with his team in 2014-19 as well, that there's a very profound amount of similarity in terms of facial morphology between the Homo antecessor and modern humans, anatomically modern humans. There's a recent paper just a week ago by Garcia Martinez et al., which shows the similarities between the scapular, your scapular bone between the Homo antecessor and anatomically modern humans. Now, how this particular feature, which is also seen in modern humans, it's such deep rooted. It tells you that the emergence of anatomically modern human in terms of traits might have started somewhere long ago. It's quite deep rooted in nature. But also one thing is quite important, because this antecessor, that is a very, very reasonable candidate for understanding the last common ancestor between the Homo sapien, Neanderthals, and the Denisovans. You also have other candidates like Heidelbergensis, but those are other debates, and we'll not talk today about that. But of course, antecessor seems to be an outlier which has a very close affinity with Homo sapien. What are the other outliers? The other outlier is this guy from Rising Star Cave in South Africa, Naledi, dating back to somewhere near 300 kilo years, co-evolving, coexisting, not I will say co-evolving, that will be wrong to say, but coexisting along with Homo sapiens. But what exactly is quite important about the Homo naledi? That there are a mosaic of physical or anatomical attributes. One side, it shows very humanist or human-like skull. Then you have a very versatile hands and palms, kind of shows the ability to that it can, or naledi can make a tools. Then you have a very long legs and human-like feet, talking about the very frequent bipedalism, bipedality within the species. But on the other part, you have this Australopithecines-like features, very primitive shoulders, the pelvis, very flattered pelvis, curved fingers like when you hold a lot, like you think of a branchiatory movements, you hold the branches. But again, recent papers have shown that these curved fingers are mostly because that these taxa were living mostly around inside or underground in the cave systems, where they need to hold a rock for a long amount of time. But again, they have a mosaic of features. You see some of the human features still there. But one question has become like how archaic species like Australopithecus naledi can live, Homo naledi, my bad. Homo naledi can live so early in time, almost coexisting along with anatomically modern humans. And complexity does not stop there. You have another outlier, which is quite important in nature. We're talking about a Hobbit, a very perfect example or typical example of island endemism, or kind of Foster's rule, where you see a kind of a evolutionary pressure on these kind of species where they go through this dwarfism and become the Hobbit like. But again, there's other arguments we'll talk in just a sec. So what you have, this 1.06 meter tall specimen, taxa coming from Liang Dua Cave in Flores Island in Indonesia, mostly Indonesia. And what you see is a very archaic-like features. And we're talking about somewhere around 60 to 90 kilo years, somewhere in late Pleistocene, where Homo sapiens are already almost not, I won't say Southeast Asia, but there are at least, you have evidences coming from Lida Ager in Sumatra, which is 68. So you see Homo sapiens are there. But how these archaic species are surviving and thriving in this isolation, that itself is a big enigma. They have a very small brain volume, like almost like a chimpanzee, like kernel capacity I'm talking about. Their pelvis is more like Australopithecines, like similar to Francis one. They have very archaic limb proportions. The hands are more big. The leg in terms of hands are more big in compared to legs. But some people say they are Homo sapiens. they have this Lorraine syndrome or other some pathological disorders. So what you see is this is kind of a pathological anatomically modern human. But this kind of discarded, and it has been debated for a long time. And what exactly what we see now, that it is possible, and again, we also have a fossil or Homo florescensis like fossil from other part of the flores, which is a site called Matamenge, dates back somewhere to 700 kilo years, which is where we see this kind of jaw, which we assume that it belongs to the same lineage. If that belongs to same lineage, we are talking about a species which is living in isolation of, we don't know for how long they have been isolated, but they're living in an island for 700 kilo years, and they have these archaic features. Many people believe, like there's a paper, and we talked, I had a conversation with Karen Barb about it, that it is possible that this species not only coming and deriving from the Homo erectus, which is another preceding population, but it is also possible there could be a pre-erectus dispersal. And because the features are so archaic in nature, the facial morphology is very archaic in nature, matching those of, so there is a kind of a parsimony based phylogeny where it matches the most of the specimens which belong to the Homo habilis. Whether Homo habilis ever left the Africa, that itself is a big question. But who is the ancestor of Floresiensis, that is still remain an enigma. We have another dwarf in our hand, coming from Philippines. The marvelous site of Calao Cave dates somewhere in the middle, late Pleistocene. You have a very fragmentary evidences. Again, very mixture of kind of features. You have anatomically modern humans like molars, but again, aside molars, you have very oddly large these premolars, which are like Australopithecines or some like early Homos. Then you have this long, narrow, curved finger, as we talked about in case of Naledi, which is very, very particular to the people or the taxas which were living in this kind of branchiatory or kind of early ape or early Australopithecines taxa. And that's make it different. You have lots of, you talked about Naledi, you talked about Floresiensis, you talk about Luzonensis, and they are not only archaic, but they are persisting for a long amount of time. They're living along with, I don't know whether they were Homo sapiens in a close habitat in a sympatric or an allopatric manner in the Calao area in the Luzon Island, but that itself is a big question. But do we have early evidence of habitation coming in Philippines? Yes, we do have. Like as a Matamenge, there's another site, not in Flores, but in Luzon, which is basically a Kalinga, where we have this evidence of rhino bones, along with some of the artifacts dated back to 727 to 709 kilo years. And the bones have the cut marks, which show some amount of human activity. We don't know the authors of these assemblage, but think for a sec. Is it possible we are talking about Luzonensis over here as well? But it's too far-fetched, but quite possible. We are seeing Floresiensis living in Flores for 700 kilo years. So it's not impossible at all. When you think all of these complications, which is put forward by the ancient DNA record, this anatomical recent discovery of this Floresiensis, Naledi, and Luzonensis, and some other things, and the multiple activity of admixture, introgression, do you see all this thing over here? I believe not. It shows certainly amount of this evolutionary tree, that phylogeny, but still something, and many of these things are unacknowledged and completely undermined. And that's where we talk about this braided stream model. I think it's one of my favorite things, what I've recently read it and have been working on deliberately for a long time now. So what exactly you have to imagine and visualize, that every channel or a stream is like a lineage, and which you can see every channel stream like a populations. And at different point of evolution, these streams are branching out and joining in. That's how you see in that kind of meta population model. And eventually some streams dries or go to extinction, but some creates a new whole channel. So what exactly it tells you, there's a multiple episodes of assimilation, accommodation, and extinction. When this is that, when you see and have an idea of that amount of complexity, how can you think that an ape stands up, it's kind of a crawl and walk and become like a bearded gentleman? So that's a kind of irony. Now moving forward, and that kind of thing which is highly impacted the one of the research we talked very briefly in the last slide about emergence of modern humans. So we talk about one concept like Homo sapiens, exclusivity versus inclusivity. Why Homo sapiens or why anatomically modern humans are so exclusive, and whether the things what makes them exclusive are really exclusive? That's a big question. And that's where actually I do my research. So you have two of these stone tool industries. I won't get into details of that, but you have these industries producing long blades, and then you have this industry based on flakes, the chips, the stone chips, which are quite different from the preceding industry, which is basically a core tool industry or bifacial or Acheulean industry. But you have this phenomenal paper by Sally McBearty and Alison Brooks in 2000 giving a mosaic of items like in ecology, technology, economy, social organization, symbolic behavior, which related and seems to be originated along with the emergence of anatomically modern humans. Sometimes actually very synonymously, many researchers tend to use some of these indices or index, fossil index, to understand the presence of modern humans outside of Africa or where you don't have fossils. We'll talk about some of the things and we'll talk about how things are quite tricky. The first and foremost example is this particular stone tool industry is mode 3, the technological industry is middle stone age or middle paleolithic, and its emergence and expansion. There are only two possibilities. Either it is convergently or kind of independently or locally. There could be multiple possibilities, we can say, but for now we can think of two generic possibilities, that either they are independently originating or emerging at different parts of the Africa, not in Africa, different part of the old world, or there is some kind of a transmission, there is some kind of a technological transmission going on, which could be a result of dispersal or descent, which is basically a part of shared ancient ancestral trait. So what you see is evidences of Jebel Irhoud or Argosali in Africa, talking about the earliest, one of the earliest Middle Stone Age assemblages or Mode 3 assemblages. But we have anomalous Atirampakam. And that site, it's quite, in a word, it's quite amazing in a way. It not only has middle Paleolithic components or these Mode 3 components, but it is situated in India, South Asia, and not only in South Asia, it's in down south of the peninsula, South Asian peninsula. So we are talking about the emergence of certain techno-complex which seems to be affiliated with the emergence of anatomically modern human. And at certain point of time, we get evidence from Atirampakam, which has these components similar to those of Africa. But not only something, you also have parallel occurrence of two different kind of technology components. You have flakes, you have different kind of projectile elements, and you also have blade components, which seems to be quite not an accidental production, but more of a deliberate attempt. And that's put you in a quite bad position, whether we're talking about the start or emergence of this these middle Paleolithic or this kind of technology is related to some one population which might have contributed to the emergence of anatomically modern humans, or the picture is all around different. But it certainly is not very clear. It still remains an enigma whether whether Atirampakams were the independent, locally developed one. That itself is a big question. The recent paper, one more paper related to lithics, which came recently from Blinken et al., talking about the presence of one of the particular lithic type, a stone tool type called Nubian points or Nubian technology, which believed to be highly associated with modern humans, anatomically modern humans, kind of emerged somewhere in East Africa, not East Africa, somewhere up in the Nile, in Nubia. And now the recent revelation from Shukba Cave in the left bank of the Palestine, what you see, these same elements, this Nubian technology, Nubian point or projectile technology is kind of co-appearing and associated with Neanderthals. And that's put us, oh my God, how it can happen. We believe that Nubian points are the indices which talks about the presence of modern humans. But that's not a picture. We talked about assimilation. It is quite possible that there was a modern human population coming out or going out of Africa, probably getting interbreeding with some modern Neanderthal population, and there will be a kind of a barter or a kind of exchange of these technological ideas. That is quite true. But to understand the more detail of it, more intricacies of it, we need more assemblages like this and more data like that. Another example of use of the pigment, that is like we see in Sally McBriart's work that use of the pigment is certainly sometimes seems as a behavior which is related to the anatomically modern humans. But that is something quite, it is certainly true that modern humans were using pigments, different kind of pigments, red ochre is one of them. But you cannot see that as exclusive behavior pattern or attribute. You have this use of ochre by Neanderthals, and like some of the sites in some of Dutch site, which takes it back to the 250 kilo years. Then you have some sites in kind of Spain, in Iberia. You also have evidences of this with geode painting to kind of ochre, again by Neanderthals, but much late in time, somewhere 60,000 years. Another evidence of coming from Iberia by Zilhau et al., which is a very, very kind of a good argument that a very deliberate, not only use of ochre, but a very symbolic use of ochre, or you see diversity and for certain elements, like they're kind of crushing or kind of painting this mollusk or clamp. And that is something quite shows the cognitive complexity of the Neanderthals living in the Iberia. So now, use of pigment, only Homo sapiens or modern humans? Doubtable. Other thing is like the consumption of marine resources. That also seems to be for a long time that it only belonged to the populations like anatomically modern humans, and things as a thing which emerged with that. But this site of Figueira Brava in in Iberian Peninsula in Portugal shows this exceptional example where Neanderthals not only consuming, but they're consuming diverse amount of marine resources, eels, congers, morays, followed by mullets, shark, and sea breams. Yeah, shark. They're also hunting these shark. It's not that impossible, but it shows the amount of dietary diversity, and that is quite important in nature. So again, fishing consumption or marine resources consumption to exclusively to modern humans or anatomically modern humans, that's quite crazy enough. And now come to the part of ecological part. We're going to talk about multiple set of evidences. So there's one very wonderful attribute and a very important attribute, which is quite important in terms of modern human dispersal as well, which is range extension. So it is believed that there are many kind of ecological or environmental niches which are inhabitable and not habited by early taxa of Homo or early members of Homo, which was later habited and kind of specialized, not only habited, specialized by Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans. And one of them is basically tropics, the tropical rainforest. So you have a very wonderful set of evidence coming from Sri Lanka, Fayan Lena, Batadombe Lena, where you see they're not only habiting these areas, but also creating a specialized technology like projectile technology, like bone and arrow technology to survive and support their subsistence. But is it only Homo sapiens? We have multiple archaic populations, probably late lineages of Homo erectus living in Southeast Asia, almost around 45 to 50 kilo, 55 some kilo years. Then you have Floresiensis, Luzonensis, and these members are living in Southeast Asia, which is basically some marked by this tropical regime. And some of the Floresiensis, they're living for 700 kilo years. Erectus is living for a high amount of time. They must have faced and confronted these tropical regimes. Whether they consume tropical resources, that could be a question. For that, we need to have a stable isotopic data or environmental data coming from these individuals. And I think so what we should be doing in upcoming point of time. Now, we talked about so many examples that how things are not quite exclusive with one particular species. One particular species. It is quite important that we have to talk about the lineages or the populations, and that populations can be irrespective of any particular species. They might have multiple species. Neanderthals, Homo sapiens living together, Neanderthal Denisovans living together, and they are producing different culture prints. How much we know? That's a question we need to ask. How fragmentary our knowledge is? That's a question we need to ask. But at the end, one thing is certainly for sure. There's only one stream which survives, which is created by multiple streams, and there's extinction of everybody except us, Homo sapiens. Why is that? Darwin says survival of fittest. I certainly agree with that, which is because represented in case of behavioral and ecological plasticity. Homo sapiens seems to be experts in assimilation, getting into different populations and assimilating, innovating, and improvising according to different ecological niches. And there's a recurrent amount of innovation has been going on, which talks about higher amount of behavioral diversity, which we see throughout the time in Middle Pleistocene. But another one thing which I like the most while reading lots of literature, the survival of the friendliest. Our ability to get mixed with lots of populations, not only populations of our own species, but probably populations like Neanderthals, Denisovans, and many of the archaic ghost populations, which we don't know much about. And that probably let us and we were able to thrive for so long of time, and rest probably are some of our species got extinct because of that particular difference. But also we need to understand while talking about any of these evidences that most of the evidences are coming from different background, genetic, cultural, anatomical, ecological, and the dynamics of every evidence is quite different. In the speed and the progression nature of genetic progression is different from the culture progression. The culture progression is different from the anatomical progression, and the ecological progression is completely all different altogether, which kind of impact all three of them. So I believe, why don't we talk about different lineages? Let's talk how many cultural lineages we have, how many populations we can target and we can encounter, we can found out in culture material. Then you see those populations whether that fit with anatomical features or not, or anatomical fossil records or not. You can also have ecological basis lineages, like a same different kind of populations living in the same kind of ecological conditions, how they are reacting to that particular ecological conditions, whether reacting same or not. So that kind of data is quite basic, but very, very important. And it says there are these different lineages based on different data type, nature of the different evidences, which talks about different progression, yet they're interlinked, interdependent, and interconnected. At the end, we have to compare them and see them, but not in the manner of one-to-one alignment. We have to understand what exactly it is telling and what extent we can correlate things. And I say very wonderful, like in a way, I was reading Charles Darwin's recently, and this quote, I also used it recently for this poster, that the love of all living beings is the most noble attribute of men. And that's why it makes us survival of the friendliest. And with that, I thank all of you to listen, but also think about that next time when you visualize Homo sapiens or human evolution, it should not be like that of something very simple and straightforward, where an ape, which is quite downward and walking, getting upright, and becoming this bearded, upright human being. It's much, much complex, and it's much, much diverse. Thank you, and namaskar to all.
Thank you so much, Gopesh. I think that is a really fascinating lecture. Gopesh, I would request you to stop the screen share. I think it is absolutely beautiful. Reminded me of our days, reminding of the class of Professor Ajit Prasad and Professor Krishnan, going back to seeing all of these. It is really interesting. Thank you. And I really like the way you started off with questioning the very idea, the general idea, genesis of the single linear progression of ape to man. And I think you reiterated that statement that we really need to think about looking into that. It is not as simple as it is seen, or is the general, the wider narrative that is. I think that is really nice. And you spoke about the spread of hominin species. I was really fascinated by the concept of you spoke about lineages, and I think that leaves in a lot of space in understanding human evolution better. I'm sure there is much, much more, as we know it is very patchy, as the evidences are also very scarce. You've gotten a lot of evidences from Africa. I would also want to know what is the role of South Asia in human origin research, if you could speak a little more about it. And before I conclude, I really liked the way you ended it also on viewing the lineages as genetic lineage, anatomical lineages, cultural lineages, and ecological lineages. I think that it looks like a beautiful approach into looking into viewing human evolution. And coming back to the question of what do you think is the role of South Asia in the human origin? And if I may also ask, and because you spoke so much about modern humans also, that as you spoke about, they went on colonizing various spaces. Do you think they have any hold in towards the extinction of the megafauna also? And with these questions, Gopesh, I think if you could start off answering, the space is also open for questions. If anybody has any questions, you could either write them down on the chat box, or you could raise your hands for direct connection. I will unmute you and you could ask your questions to the speaker directly. Gopesh, over to you.
Thank you, Preet. Certainly, that's a quite interesting question. Coming to the first part, how South Asia plays a major role. So there's a recent, we have to see us as an animal, first of all. We are part of this ecosystem. We are also a fauna. And our behavioral pattern is affected by other animals, and we are also doing the same, vice versa. And that's where this megafauna extinction comes in the picture. When exactly human beings become this planetary force, that we have that amount of population, we are impacting the ecosystem, not only impacting the ecosystem, but shaping the ecosystem as per our need, like what exactly I will say the earlier initial start of Anthropocene. So you have lots of debates going on. So you have this megafauna, like basically all the animals greater than 45 kilo. You have, but when you talk about megafauna, the picture which comes in the mind is this woolly mammoth or the woolly rhinoceros. They're humongous, massive in size. So you have what exactly you see. There's a kind of a temporal progression, and at certain point of time, most of this faunal species dies. And why it is happening? It is so very sharp. Like in case of North America, it is very sharp in nature. Like there's a certain time period and everything get extinct. There's a kind of ecological or population bottleneck. And only some of them kind of thrive through and getting into Holocene, what we see today in the natural world. Now, people have argument that environment plays a major role over there, but which environment might have triggered these extinction of these animals, megafauna. But it is also possible that many people believe that Homo sapiens or the emergence and expansion of Homo sapiens led to that. But it can be multiple thing. Imagine there is a kind of a contraction of forest environment. So you have certain animals who only lives in forest. When there is a decrease in forest cover, there will be more of an open environment. When these animals, when they come to the open environment, they become more vulnerable. And as they become more vulnerable, they can be easily get hunted by the populations. And probably it could be the both factors. Coming to the second part, the South Asia, I believe it's very, very important. It seems like it was a period when people were starting research in African continent. The people, nobody was expecting that, okay, Africa can give you nothing. Like when we're talking about time of Piltdown forgery, when it was happening 1990s and 1910 and 1920s. Same thing with India and South Asia at this point of time. The abundance of evidence we have, the abundance of data we have, it's very, very kind of astonishing. It's only a matter of time that we need to research a lot, because South Asia has multiple set of lineages, specifically ghost lineages. Like Sheila Etheria says, that Narmada fossil, the only fossil we have, it might belong to that lineage itself, rather than putting them into the category of Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis. So it shows certain amount of similarities. So these questions can be answered, but at this point of time, we don't have enough data. But it'll be more interesting in upcoming times when we implement these models, the models of Braided tree model, into South Asian evolutionary research.
Thank you, Gopesh. I'm sure there is a lot to discuss. We'll take it out of a post. I'm sure there are a lot of questions coming in. Before that, I would request if we are having a discussion, if your videos are on, it would be really nice to have an interaction. I see a lot of questions coming in. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Professor Atushi, who is a very senior Paleolithic archaeologist from the University of Tokyo, Japan. Sir is here with us in the talk. And there is a question from Professor Niranjan Upur. Sir, over to you, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. This time I have only one question. You archaeologists, you reconstruct the brain size. I understand that. Now, do you reconstruct the vocal tract? See, I am asking this from the point of view of a linguist. Okay. Do you reconstruct the vocal tract of human beings?
Certainly, certainly, sir. So it always depends on what is the nature of evidence you have. If you have evidences talking about features related to your language or communication skills, that can be morphometrically or statistically can be recorded, and people talk about those features as well. So principally, we know that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens both were very good and must have been very good in terms of communication. But still lots of research has to be done in this particular regard because the evidence is quite fragmentary. We don't get that amount of fossils. But one example could be, there could be certain the genes which related to the pitch and certain, I don't know much about in that regard, but that can be usual. Like, so it is, instead of a physical attributes, one can get into the molecular attribute, which might talks about the speaking capabilities or the lingual part.
I think that gene, people have rejected that gene.
It's certainly like, I believe it's very recent in a time.
Yeah.
We need more data about that. We need a bigger sample set. How, like, just think of that. How many bones you have in your body? When you go to a site, you get this much of a fossil, probably a finger bone, probably some part of your cervical, some part of your crania, and how much story you can tell out of that. It is quite tricky job, and one cannot exhaust the science. I say, in order to answer the questions, I cannot do a bad science, and that will be quite a crime in a way.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you, Professor Niranjan. I would request, I'm unmuting Mr. Sunil Kumar sir. Over to you for your question.
Yeah, am I audible? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Can you? Yeah. Yeah, my question is a simple generic question. What are the errors and biases that may creep in such research? They can, on a scientific level or a cultural, textual level, for instance, much of early science was influenced by Christian theology in Europe, or in the present day context, we see that China wants to leave its imprint on everything. That is, on a cultural level, on a scientific level, just a generic query. I wanted the speaker's perspective, Mr. Jha. Thanks.
Yep, that's quite wonderful. Actually, the perspective is always there. It's a matter of a reader. How do you kind of get that impression, that perspective you see is over there? You see that bias or not? So one of the main bias I will say, in India, the evolutionary research was mostly started by the Britishers, like Sir Robert Bruce Foote, and later lots of people, Carlyle, Camille, Burkitt, lots of people kind of work, which are geologists and some of them are naturalists. They completely imitated this European idea of culture progression. You have early Stone Age, middle Stone Age, later Stone Age, and they completely put it in the case of South Asian research. Now, what exactly happened afterwards? The people who got trained and who started working on, they were still using those templates. Imagine if I use the same template, the moment I identify in a wrong manner, my research goes in a completely wrong direction. Like, there's an example, for a long time, people used to think that there's a strong, long, elongated blade pieces, like stone pieces. There seems to be quite a marker of modern human presence, and which is a very, very Eurocentric way, because it happens in Europe, but not everywhere else in the old world. But that marker was used exhaustively to talk about modern human presence in South Asia. And that is a very good example of a bias. Other example could be, you have there's certain kind of I say, it is kind of deep rooted, which is more of a colonial in nature. That how do you define a particular species archaic, primitive, or putting that term in terms of defining the attribute. And while talking about this biases based on archaic primitiveness and some or a behavioral modernity or anatomical modernity, that these parameters are something quite jacketed, which kinds of completely undermine the local or peculiarities of that particular specimen. And that has been happening at multiple point of time. There are multiple authors you can read in that regard, which talks about this detail in much detailed manner. I can push forward those papers and also books in that regard.
Thank you so much. I think we'll take one more question from Mr. I think I see a few more questions. Sir Sundaram Ramachandran, sir. I'll probably unmute. Sir, I'm unmuting you if you could ask your question.
Yeah, I just wanted to inquire. Just clarify. So this out of Africa theory is now, would you say it is past? And now there are multiple origins now. That's what-
Multiple origins, no. So if you talk about multiple origins, that regionalism, which is Milford Woolfop's idea, basically, is quite different in that case. It's not as same as you see. If you read the literature, it will get to know, but I will talk very briefly about it. So southern dispersal hypothesis, where we talk about the modern humans came out of Africa through taking the coastal rim or the coastal areas and dispersed into different part of Asia and reached Australia. We don't have evidence.
Mhm.
You cannot. It certainly talks. So it's certainly kind of proven by the mitochondrial DNA record, which Harpending and other people have been saying. And you certainly have these dispersal occurring at 60,000 years. Now, certainly it could be possible, but we don't have evidence at this point of time to talk about. We don't have coastal sites. How many coastal sites do you have in Africa? Recent Pangaea site, which is quite different in nature. You don't have coastal sites in Arabia. You don't have coastal sites in India as well. Genetically, it is possible. Archaeologically, anatomically, on the basis of fossils, we don't have evidence to talk about that. Other thing about the multi-regionalism. So what exactly we don't say that the Homo sapiens are occurring at different point of time. What exactly? Imagine just anatomically modern humans have A, B, C, D, E, F, these attributes. And these attributes are kind of developing in different parts of the Africa. And because of the rapid or continuous admixture between these metapopulations, you have this gradual emergence of modern humans. So it is quite different from the Milford Woolfop's idea of multi-regionalism. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. The other, okay.
Yeah.
Sir, I will probably take questions from. We'll probably take your question in the WhatsApp chat box, and we'll take more questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Sundaram. Mr. Gautam Ghosh, I think you had a question, sir. I'm unmuting you. And in that time, Professor Atushi, if you're here, sir, we would like to hear from you if there are any comments after we take in the question from Mr. Gautam.
Thank you, Gopesh Jha. You talked about different types of tools being used by the people. Any idea about when the musical instruments came into the picture? Any type of musical instruments like conch shell or something like that?
So you ask a wonderful question, but I must say I am not aware of a date, but you certainly have evidences. Specifically in case of in Europe, when we talk about this, with the expansion of this behavioral modernity, that human beings are exploring the other raw materials, specifically like bone, shell. So you have these evidences where people believe that these artifacts are used to create certain amount of noise or a kind of a sound. Like you have a human phalange or finger bone. Then you have a certain kind of pallets. If you tie with the string and you kind of rotate very continuously, it creates this kind of a vibrational based sounds. So these evidences are there, but I definitely say I don't have much reading on that regard, but there are evidences, but again, they're quite scanty. These are more of a hypothetical ones rather than a concrete evidences.
Thank you.
But people are also working on that on ethnographic possibles. So what exactly we are doing now, there are multiple kind of stone slabs found in different archaeological sites. So you see whether these stone slabs can be used as a musical instruments, like in terms of tapping or kind of vibrating or something like that.
Thank you.
Mr. Gautam, thank you, Gopesh. I think we'll take one last question from Rakesh before winding up the session. Rakesh, over to you.
Thank you, Gopesh, for this wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. I have like one connected question. When we talk about this evolution, we generally talk about this anatomical evolution in that sense. But now this I'm sure that you are aware of this dual inheritance theory. When we talk about this gene culture, when culture also affect this evolution process and the evolution also affect the gene and culture. So in that sense, do you see any kind of evidence during this human evolution we talk about? So culture influencing the evolution in that sense. And then the other question connected to that, when we talk about this evolution, we see this evolution of tool technology is compared to very slow in that sense. When we talk about this evolution, it's a very large scale, and in that sense, culture evolution is very slow in that sense. What do you think? What could be the reason or Or what is your opinion on that? Thank you so much.
Certainly, that's the thing we also want to. So one thing is very, very important. At what scale you are building the story of evolution? Global, local, or am I only talking about my only one particular site? Very important. The outcomes I'm getting from that site, at what extent I can implement those outcomes on other sites and similar kind of assemblies throughout the world. That is very important. At every site, you have these components. If you have a fossil, if you have a gene, genomic data, if you have a culture data. And as I told, they all progress in very different manner. So it is very impossible to say which plays first, which comes first. Either you see a culture innovation, but one thing can be sorted out at this point of time. You have to see how culture is reacting in context of environmental conditions. Do you see any change in cultural trends when there are very kind of challenging environmental conditions, or is it same? And you see these patterns in terms of space and also time, but at a local scale. So you'll get to know how the local inhabitants at that area are reacting to each other. And that will give you the idea, okay, how culture is moving. Talking about anatomical movement, you need to have a large set of fossils. Like Damnesi you have in Georgia, there they talk about those things, but again, the evidence is quite scanty. You cannot talk about it. Genetic data, lots of area we don't have genetic data. You only need those areas which preserve these kind of data, like Altai, which is very cold, Siberia. So it's quite difficult at this point of time, but I believe in future, we should be answering those questions.
Thank you so much, Rakesh, for that question, and Gopesh for answering. There are probably a lot more questions coming in. We'll open up the WhatsApp space for eventual questions. I'm sure Gopesh will be there answering your questions. And I would request Professor Sangeeta Menon is here, ma'am, for ma'am's comments.
Yeah, thank you, Preet. And first of all, I wish to thank Gopesh Jha for a brilliant talk. I was moving around a little bit, but my speaker was on, so I was also listening to him. And this debate between nature and culture is almost unending. And it's amazing to think that when does nature meet culture, or what is that meeting point, you know? And so how far the neo-Darwinian thinkers and philosophers come, how far have they reached in perhaps assessing what is the starting point of culture, or a different ability which perhaps we can describe as a cognitive ability, or as an ability to be together, not for ensuring your survival chances, but perhaps, I think as I see in the chat messages, perhaps survival in friendship, perhaps, as you mentioned. So these are very, very interesting, and I'm sure Preet will invite Gopesh Jha again for continued discussion. It's amazing, and this talk has been on origins, and I am here to also talk about a little bit of the origin of this Friday lectures. We started Friday lectures when I think COVID-19 was kind of on the thick of it, and can you just give me 1 minute? I'm going to be back in 1 minute, okay?
Sure, ma'am. I think ma'am has an important call. She's been in touch with professors in NIAS for an important meeting. That is what I think. So if there is any other question, I think in the gap, we could probably take them. Are we currently missing out on any question? Ma'am is here. Ma'am, you're on mute, ma'am. Ma'am, if you could unmute yourself.
I'm sorry about that. So we started the Friday lectures during the COVID-19 time. And for us, for Meera, me, Preet, and Niharika, and others, Ashwini, Abhishek, all of us, our entire team, for us, it was a community activity for ourselves to express, first of all, for us to be helped by ourselves. And then we thought, perhaps when we help ourselves, that help can also help others. So it became a community event, and we gradually saw that a lot of people are interested. We have participants who continuously participate, and we had speakers also from very varied realm of subjects. So to just make it brief, that it was successfully also as a psychological experiment, and also as a community experiment where people could come together and alleviate the stress and anxiety, but by knowing other things, by perhaps knowing different things. So it was a nice distraction, which I think was also helpful to all of us. So why I make this prelude is Gopesh Jha's lecture today is the last lecture of our season, for Friday lecture season. And we are taking a break and we will come back. And when we come back, we would have perhaps better ideas, innovative ideas. And if you have a suggestion what we should do or how we should organize these kind of community events, please do email us at NIAS Consciousness Program at nias.res.in or message me, Meera or Preet. And we would love to hear from you. And we will be back with another season of Friday lectures, perhaps later in the year. We have not decided a date, but we definitely have plans and ideas in mind. Things are being cooked up, but we also want that to naturally emerge. So we are waiting for that point. So I just wanted to thank all the participants, the audience and the speakers of Friday lectures, NIAS CSP Friday lectures until now, for helping us to cope with the COVID-19 environment and think about completely new things in a very fascinating manner. So, and I don't want to thank our coordinators team because we are a family and we don't thank each other. So, but thanks to Gopesh Jha for giving the last lecture of this season. And it was started by another young scholar, I think, who is now in the United States. I forget which university. And his lecture was on something on philosophy and on a very fundamental topic. Rohan Somji, if I remember his name right. So it's nice to look at, nice to see that our season has been bridged by two young scholars on completely different topics, but both talking about the nature of humanity and the human self. Thank you, Preet.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I see Professor Atushi here. I was requesting sir if he's around for his comments. Sir, before winding up, now that we see you, it'll be really nice to hear from you. Professor Atushi is a senior Paleolithic archaeologist from the University of Tokyo. Sir, unmuting you. Thank you, sir. Yeah.
So, yes, it was so excellent talk. So it was so interesting. I have not so much things to comment to you, but for instance, now we should reconsider many of terminology regarding to archaeology. For instance, how we can define and divide lower, middle, upper Paleolithic, and how we can reorganize correspondence between stage of human evolution and such archaeological chronological division of Paleolithic age. And so your talk is actually brilliant, but still we should, how can I say, organize and fix different ideas. So I'd like to ask you, what is your idea for alternative terminology for division of Paleolithic or stages of culture or mode of technologies like this?
That is something Atushi also knows, like I would like to work on such things, and certainly completely agree with Atushi in a way that now concept is something like we have a template, like we have a jacketed forms, and you put everything in that form. You don't have something local, everything is so homogenized. It's like culture stasis is going on, everything is all same. Now what exactly I also intend to do, probably I will try to pursue during my doctoral projects and all, is seeing things without putting up a name, rather talking about what exactly, in what manner the stone has been baked, how it has been shaped, what is the raw material procurement methods, what are the certain, going to more of a detailed attributes, What are the components? Talk about the functional attributes or functional components of a stone tool technology, and how this behavior kind of acting in a diachronically, like in spatial and temporal wise, and that we understand. So I will say my stone tool research, my stone tool will only talk about the behavior of the habitants which belong to that area. And then, of course, drawing inferences. Do you see such behavioral trend or technological trend anywhere else in India as well in the world? But putting them in same slot, that will be quite tricky. That will be quite inappropriate.
So I think we always should take care of such misuse or confusion of new idea with old terminology. So yes, I think this is a big opportunity to start our new thinking. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Atushi. And before winding up, I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Professor Madhav Deshpande, sir is also here. And as Gopesh mentioned, Madhavji, sir, I'm so happy to see you here, Professor. Anything, sir is also, I am sure most of us are aware of sir's lecture series. Most of us are attending, and very, very happy to see you here, sir. Thank you so much. And as Gopesh, right before, I'm really sorry, sir, if you want to speak anything, any comments, sir, before we wind up? I think sir stuck.
No, I just joined rather late.
Okay.
Into the talk, but it is fascinating.
Thank you. Madhavji. Sangeeta, ma'am, if.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back and say that, first of all, thank you to Professor, excuse me, Professor Atsushi Noguchi for being here. A big thank you from National Institute of Advanced Studies for your presence and helping our young scholars by giving your very valuable feedback. Thank you. And as I was just mentioning, this is our last lecture of the Friday series of this first season. And Rohan Somji started this series with a very fundamental question on what is thinking and what do we call as human thinking. And it essentially pointed to the nature of human mind and perhaps origin of human thinking. And here we are without any planning with the concluding lecture of this season on discussing on another kind of origins. And thanks to Gopesh Jha for doing that discussion. So just to repeat, we will be coming back. This is only an interlude which we are taking because we also wish to imagine perhaps more creatively what else we could do, which would interest you, which would sustain you, and which would help all of us. And so I just wanted to reiterate that. And I also wanted to give my greetings to Madhavji. By seeing him, I can't escape his presence. So thank you for being there. So yeah,
thank you
so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think it was a wonderful lecture, Gopesh. Thank you for being with us. And I would again end with the line, I think we need it more than ever than I think our ancestors on the concept of survival of the friendliest. I think it's love, kindness, and peace that will take our race ahead. Thank you so much for reminding us that. And I would request Meera for the formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Meera.
Thank you, Preet. And first of all, thank you, Gopesh, for such an excellent lecture. And my hope for you is that you leave no stone unturned during your research. And yeah, thank you so much, Professor Atsushi and Madhav Deshpande sir as well for being with us today. It's an honor. And thank you, Dr. Sangeeta ma'am, for organizing this, for conceptualizing this Friday lecture series and giving us all an opportunity to interact with so many scholars from across the world. And that has been a great joy for all of us. And also Niharika, who has been coordinating this very flawlessly for during all this time. And this has been the 33rd lecture of the Friday lecture series. And a lot of you all have been like joining us consistently consistently. Some of you are joining whenever there is an interesting topic, and you all have been giving such good feedback and really enjoying the discussions as well. So thank you everybody, and we will also be opening the WhatsApp group for your comments and feedback further. So once again, thank you everyone, and this is, like ma'am said, a short break, and we'll be joining you again. So until then, a very good big bye, and thank you everybody for being with us.
Thank you. Namaskara.